Hi everyone, welcome back to Novel Nomad and welcome to my Melbourne book haul that I nearly dropped all over my floor. But thankfully I didn't. The pile is safe within my grasp, and let's get started straight into this awesome book haul. I went to Melbourne for a 3-day weekend. It was a wonderful retreat. I caught up with some absolutely beautiful people and I checked out some absolutely beautiful bookstores. Now if you do want to see what Melbourne has to offer, I do have a Walking the City of Literature vlog where I vlogged a bit of a longer hike I spent going around Melbourne and showing you all the bookstores that I found. I'll link it down below and up here, so be sure to check that out. It was done I think about a few years ago now, but it is still a good fun video which you can still use many of the resources that are available in the video itself. Now, like I posted early in the week, I have started a bit of a challenge for myself, which is a non-fiction a month challenge. So I need to read at least one non-fiction book a month. I started in July last month, but I bought some more and some shorter ones as well, so I can get into it and not have to go through a very big expose on a particular topic. Starting off is Triumph and Disaster by Stefan. Now this one is, I think, 5 historical mini essays about moments in time which have basically changed history. If a certain event hadn't happened the way it did, the history or the way we would be living today would be drastically different. This intrigues me greatly, as usually I read very heavy in-depth history non-fiction, but having something small that I could read one essay every now and then, I think that would be a fantastic read to get into. And this cover is amazing. I'm just gonna get that foil working for you there. But yeah, so I thought this was a fantastic find. Next is another small history book, and that is Elizabeth I, A Study in Insecurity by Helen. Now Helen is the author of The She-Wolves, which was recently done as a BBC documentary, so that was fascinating in itself. But what I love is this is actually a series of books on the different monarchs themselves. They've got a few in this range. Let me see. This is part of the Penguin Monarch series, of which there are some absolutely fantastic looking mini biographies on the monarchs themselves. But I think this is a really refreshing take. Obviously Elizabeth is a very fascinating character in history, but to actually have a mini biography by a female historian looking at Elizabeth and her impact upon British history, I think is fantastic. Now, still on the history vein, we have Travellers in the Third Reich by Julia Boyd. Just look at this wonderful Art Deco 1930s cover. It looks absolutely beautiful and it fits perfectly into the idea of the book, and that is the rise of fascism through the eyes of travellers. So this is actually accounts that she's collected from different people who travelled through fascist Nazi Germany from 1933 all the way up to the war. And I think it might go a little bit past it. I'm not quite sure if it does go past and into the Second World War, but I think it'll be a very interesting take to see how the contemporaries of the time viewed fascism, because after the First World War people were trying to find a new way forward, and fascism really spoke to many people in that way. So this will be absolutely fascinating. It's a very interesting take on more social history to see how people's thoughts and ideas were played out at that time and being presented, rather than just viewing Nazi Germany through a purely military history. My last non-fiction book isn't quite a history book. It is more of a human history, so environmental human history, and it's called The Human Planet by Simon Lewis and Mark Muslin. Now what I found very interesting about this, one, it is in a Pelican book. So Penguin, one of the imprints Penguin used to have is Pelican, which is all the science and exploration and non-fiction titles that the Penguin books didn't publish. So what I loved about this one is it's looking at what's called an Anthropocene. So instead of having like an ice age or an environmental movement that's being powered by the climate itself, this is now powered by humans, and it's looking at humans as a geological superpower. So instead of just viewing us as the recipients of climate, we are in fact affecting climate and causing climate change. Okay, so jumping straight into fiction, and that is starting with The Sioux Woman's Gift by Sally Magnuson. This one sounds quite interesting. So it's actually historical fiction that based itself around true events. So in 1627, pirates raided the coasts of Iceland and abducted nearly 400 people and took them to be slaves in Algiers. And in this particular story, you follow a pastor and his wife and daughter as they are one of the abducted slaves. And you follow her story as she goes into this new world, this new environment, and has to face not only her past but what will happen in her future. I think it's a very interesting take. I think this is a very interesting world history development, and also to focus on a female voice I'm very much interested in, because that would have been greatly lost during the 1620s especially, but to have a female slave's voice is going to be highly fascinating. Next is an absolutely beautiful edition of Strange Meeting by Susan Hill. This is set during World War I, where a man who's suffering shell shock is sent back to the front to an almost unrecognisable battalion. He hardly knows his friends, his commanding officers an alcoholic, and many of them are slowly sinking into depression and high anxiety. But there is one man who he finds is a bright spark in this otherwise dreary existence awaiting death, and he's the man who is yet to go onto the battlefield. And the main character, John, feels a certain protectiveness over his innocence, but also impending inevitability of its loss. So I think this will be a very interesting take. I know Susan Hill wrote a lot of more psychological horror books, so it'll be interesting to see how she places her more psychological horror into the First World War trenches. So I think this will be a very emotional read. So we're still in the First World War, and we're looking at The Iron Gustav by Hans Falada. Now, Hans Falada wrote one of the most intriguing World War II books I have on my shelf, and that is Alone in Berlin, about a man's independent struggle to rebel against Nazi Germany during World War II in Berlin. And that is a bit of a cat and mouse story where a Nazi officer tries to find out who is leaving all these resistance postcards around Berlin. But Iron Gustav actually takes us back into the First World War and before that, where Gustav Hackendal is actually a very powerful patriarch of his family and runs a very successful business. But he's called the Iron Gustav because he has little to no feeling, emotion or tenderness for his family. And he finds through his negligence and his unwillingness to bend and accept his family that he loses them very quickly. And this all happens before the absolute upheaval of the First World War, where loss not only happens on the personal front but the business front, and his kingdom that he's dedicated his life to starts crumbling around him. So this is actually going to be really interesting, written by a German author of the time, and also is going to be a bit of a family epic, so I think this is going to be really fascinating. Okay, finally a bit more of a fun read, I promise. I think this is just a very big winter selection, as you're seeing right here. But this is Whatever Happened to Margot. So if you know the Durrells, or the family Durrells, which have been on the BBC recently as a TV series, which is based off Jared Durrell's My Family and Other Animals, which is a very, very interesting biography story about a young boy whose family uproots themselves from England and moves to the Greek islands. And Margaret is the eldest sister of Gerald Durrell, and this is actually her biography. This is written by Margaret Durrell, and I think it's quite interesting because you focus so much on the sons that, yeah, whatever did happen to Margot, you don't quite know. But I hope this book will enlighten me in that, and given how much fun it was to read her brother's books, I think this will be a great book to read as well. Okay, these ones are definitely going to be presented as a 3 because they are all beautiful and all linked. And they are Caroline Duffy's collections. They're recently publishing out the Poet Laureate of England at the moment, Caroline Duffy, all her collections in these absolutely stunning covers. So this is The Bees, which I love bees, so that was immediate buy for me. The next is Rapture, which is absolutely beautiful, has all the tree nymphs on it. And thirdly, it is A Feminine Gospel. Now, I have Caroline Duffy's The World's Wife, which I absolutely love, which is a very interesting and modern take using poetry on how women have been perceived in classic literature and mirroring that to how women are still being perceived like that today. So I absolutely loved her style of poetry, and it's a little bit longer and more lyrical, which I love because I do love the romantic poets. I have studied them quite a lot, but there are more in this collection and I might just have to go check them out. Alright, so thank you for joining me for my Melbourne book haul. It was super fun. I've posted a few pictures of my Melbourne trip, mainly of all the delicious food I ate over there. If you go to Melbourne, be sure to check out as many cafes and brunch spots as you can, because it is cafe culture over there, the centre point, I believe, of cafe culture in Australia. But they do have some beautiful books. So be sure to check out my Walking the City of Literature video and tell me down below which of these you think I should read first and do a review. Which do you think is the most fascinating? So thank you all for joining me. I'll see you all next time. Bye!